it is a difficult time. It's a time that our brains interpret, and we'll talk about this some more in a second, as danger. But basically, it is a time of difficulty, intense difficulty. Like, you could call 2020 a year of crisis. And while that might sound very dramatic, we're not actually wrong in doing that. But our resilience and adaptability is incredible. And this is the thing, we do adjust and we adapt and we get on with things for the most part. And with conflict, there are a lot of different ways to define conflict, and there are many different types of conflict and many different types, of course, of crises. But it's the clashing of opposed principles, which sounds like waves on a rock, to be honest, and whether that's good or bad. So the thing about conflict and crisis, while they're two very different things and defined as different things, they feed into each other. Conflict often leads to crisis, which often leads to conflict, and they're both, I guess, two wheels of the same vehicle in many ways, because there's just this momentum and this vicious cycle that one swings to the other, swings to the other. So while we're going to talk about them both separately, we're also going to talk about them interchangeably, because the ways in which you can address conflict and crisis overlap hugely. I put this little picture together. If I had a way of blending the two colors, and maybe I just need to do some more PowerPoint skills, I'd be able to create more of a Venn diagram to give you an idea of how they overlap. So I'm going to talk about conflict and crisis in business. Now, this is a little, I actually really like this picture, and it's not intended for dramatic impact, but you get the effect. So the effect of conflict and crisis in business can be catastrophic, but it doesn't have to lead to a closure of business. And I know a lot of us are seeing that this year, and I imagine most of you are on this talk or joining us online are either solopreneurs or part of an SME or part of a bigger unit but work as an independent. So the idea of conflict and crisis brings up a lot of concerns. So for businesses, the effects are quite massive. You can read the effects on the screen, and I'm sure all of you would have a lot to even add to this list. These are just the main points. It is not something we can ignore. We'll talk to you about what we can do. We are a lot more resilient than we give ourselves credit for. We have automatic crisis responses built in. But when it comes to businesses and operations, and we can see a lot of that this year, it's a struggle. It's very difficult to predict all potential crisis, and nobody could have predicted. Well, maybe they could have, but I certainly didn't factor a COVID response into my own business. I just had to learn on the job, and I'm sure most of you are probably in the same situation. So we've also got the effects on our own personal lives as well when it comes to conflict and crisis.
So effects on personality, and perhaps some of you listening to this now are experiencing this, but both Gillian and I are qualified therapists, and we are seeing a lot of this coming into our practice as well. With this crisis that's affecting you now, we're seeing another aspect of people coming in. They are very stressed, they're anxious, they're fed up, they are lost, they're losing their contact with their friends and family again. They've been abiding by the law, they're fed up seeing people going to, we were talking before this call, I wasn't aware it happened in Grafton Street. You know, this is affecting us, you know, a lot. And we're right. And I'm telling even the client this morning I was working with, how are you getting on? How do you feel about this? I was fed up. Did you have a rant? Yes, have a rant. Have a rant. This is really, really affecting us all. And you need to acknowledge your emotions personally before you can actually step up and see opportunities. So it's right to acknowledge your stress, your anxiety. You may feel out of control. It's right to acknowledge it.
So crisis management, life happens. Life happens, and there is nothing you can really do about that. And I know that doesn't really help, but life does happen. And we respond to life happening because we're human. And we respond, as Dermot said, initially with stress and anxiety. And we did a talk, actually you'd find it on, I know these talks are recorded, we did a talk recently enough on change management. We go into this in a lot more detail, so find that recording if you're more interested in learning more about how we respond to change and how our brains react initially to the shock of something new or something unprecedented or unexpected. So we have a lot, our brains are very complicated, but for the purpose of this talk with 3 parts to the brain that responds to everything, and it's emotional, which is the reptilian brain, or sorry, limbic system, the survival mode, which is the reptilian brain, and our logical, rational part of the brain, which is the neocortex. And each of these parts of the brain are responsible for different ways in which we react to things. So sometimes with time, you can change your response to something. Sometimes with a bit of reflection, you can see, oh, maybe I personally hate the phrase overreacted, but it is used, and you all know what I mean by that phrase. I think we react, and then afterwards we get to see a different perception. But when we are in survival mode, that's when we're stressed, we're anxious, we're thinking negatively. It's all or nothing thinking, catastrophic thoughts. And that is literally so we can prepare ourselves for the worst possible scenario so that we can survive it. So having that type of crisis response is very normal, very natural. And that initial anxiety, panic, dread, that is our brains trying to keep us alive. So it's your survival instinct kicking in. So if you're actually feeling fed up and anxious, well done, you're just human. That's part of it. It's the unpleasant part of it, but it goes with the territory of being a human being. Our limbic system then is the part of our brain that's responsible for emotion. So that's when the feelings kick in. So we have the physical response of, oh, you know, that knot in the stomach, I feel sick sort of a feeling. And then we'll start thinking, I'm angry, I'm sad, I'm upset, I'm fed up, I'm insert words here, I'm happy. There doesn't have to be all be negative. Some people really enjoy this working from home and isolation sort of a thing. Not everybody, it's not for me. But our emotions then will kick in. And after a while, and we'll give you a tip on how you can do this, we start becoming logical, rationalizing, resolution focused. We can have a bit more perception. We can put ourselves in other people's shoes. We can have empathy, and empathy is a very logical thing. The idea of putting yourself in other people's shoes. We can think empathically, and we can practice the idea of emotional intelligence, but we can also feel it, and they operate in different parts of our brain. So there's this idea you can't learn emotional intelligence. You can, but you can't fake the feelings. So I hope that makes sense. So life does happen. Our brains respond to life, and that's just the way it is. And different parts of our brains take on different meanings to what way we interpret crisis or conflict. Now, there is a really simple technique, which Dermot's going to show you, that can actually help you get on top of this and not out-hack your own humanity, but just become aware of the process and cope better with it, rather than immediately having that reptilian brain get into the driver's seat and take over.
This is CBT, cognitive behavior therapy, and it's a simple little technique that if you challenge your thoughts, and with my clients I work with, I ask them to challenge their thoughts by writing it down. Their initial thought, how do they feel? Okay, they're fed up with what's going on. They're in crisis mode. They're feeling angry. What's their behavior? They actually withdraw from their family. So then they challenge their thoughts. Actually, what can they do? What opportunities are out there? What can they see? What is this? Yes, you've lost contact with some members of family now, but you will have the time. One person saying to me, like, I'm going to take creativity. You know, actually, it's a time now to do another course again I want to do. So when they had this thought, they wrote it down, they changed their behavior, they became a bit more hopeful, and then they started opening up more. So it's a way of just stepping back. It's a simple little way of stepping back from stress that's all around and taking the power back. And honestly, when I was studying this CBT, I didn't have any belief in it, but I'm seeing it now really benefiting the clients I work with. It's a way of managing your thoughts, taking the power back from those negative thoughts that you have around the crisis at the moment, and seeing the opportunity in there that you're probably not aware of. So it's a very, very simple tool, but it's actually a very powerful tool.
And like that, on our behavior, the behavior is driven by the primitive brain until you catch the behavior. So as that diagram Dermot showed, it is a cycle. So if you can intervene that cycle in any one of those levels, so if you catch a behavior, then you can have a responsibility over the thoughts and the feelings. Or if you catch the feelings, then you can respond by editing your behavior or your thoughts. So all you really need to do to literally take yourself out of that cycle is to get into it on one of those 3 points, and then do the exercise of looking at, okay, how do my thoughts affect my feelings, my behavior, or how does my behavior affect my feelings and my thoughts? So you don't need to have it all figured out. You can literally step onto that diagram at any one of those points and just do a little bit of self-awareness and reflection and think, how does this impact this? And that, in even doing that simple exercise and asking yourself that question, you're engaging your full brain. You're bringing in all of the moving parts of your brain, so you're able to think of the problem with all of these things firing. So I'm not here to promote Winston Churchill by any means, in case anybody's having a response to this, but I do, whatever you think or know about him, you have to admire some of what he's done. And I just love this quote. I use it again and again and again. I actually have it on a post-it on my bedroom mirror, which I know how that sounds, but I'm a therapist, and it's good for me to have a reminder on a daily basis that every crisis can become an opportunity, because where there is crisis, things have to change. Change is going to come out of this year. People are talking about the new norm and what life's going to look like going forward. I've begun to phrase it the new abnorm. I can't get my head around this whole idea of the way we are being the new norm, but I can cope with the new abnorm. So never let a good crisis go to waste. Every crisis brings opportunity, because things have to change when we're in crisis mode. We're forced to think outside the box, and we are never going to be as resilient as we are when we're backed into a corner. And everybody, I'm sure, knows the phrase, you know, what is it? You don't know how strong a tea bag is till you put it in hot water. It's the same with crisis. You don't know how resilient or how strong you're capable of being until you have to be.
Yes.
So let's get a little bit technical. Dermot?
Yes.
Now, don't worry, you're going to get this slide. I used to work in financial services for 20 odd years, mostly financial services, mostly risk management, but legal and credit as well. And I was involved heavily in the business response to business continuity and crisis management. And then when I became a psychotherapist and I became a trainer, I began to look at this psychologically. A business crisis management plan it's not necessarily essential if you're a solopreneur or an SME, but from a psychological effect, it's almost detrimental, because knowing that you have a plan in place, that when worst case scenario happens, you have this documented piece of information that will step in, that you've made when you're not in crisis, and will take over. You're immediately bringing in the logical part of your brain you know you have, even when you're not feeling it in that moment. It will help give you some sort of self-soothing. It'll help you know that you are taking steps to manage things, and it'll give you back that sense of control that crisis makes us believe that we've lost. So if you don't have a crisis management plan, you don't have to have a technical crisis management plan. You do at the back of your mind anyway. I didn't have a crisis management plan, but I did in terms of, oh, what happens if I lose an employee, or what if I lose a client, or what happens if I have an audit? Like, not that would be a crisis, but when you're a solopreneur and you get an audit, it's extra time you haven't factored into your business. So things like this, I have these factored in, but I never thought what would happen in the case of COVID. So I've now got, well, I can go online, I can be adaptable, I can be flexible, I can change the services I offer. And a lot of businesses have had to do that this year. So if you put a little bit of time, and you can do this pen on paper, it doesn't have to be fancy, and make a plan. In the event of crisis, here are the basic things I have to hand. And that can simply be a list of, where do I need to communicate this? Do I need to put it out in social media? Do I need to say business closed for the next 6 weeks, or whatever it is? Where does this need to be communicated to? Have I got people who I can delegate the crisis management tasks? Have I a spokesperson who can deal with media and customer inquiries, so that I can just focus on the other side of things? And just writing out a bit of a plan, and you can make this as technical or as simple as it really reflects on your business. It really helps, because long term, this helps manage the anxiety, the uncertainty, the sense of feeling out of control, and it gives you back a sense of direction. Okay, in the event of the unknown happening, I know I have these resources. And that in itself is gold, because if you have that document to hand, when everything hits the fan, you've got a document there prepared when you weren't in that anxious state, where survival mode wasn't in the driver's seat. And it's almost like you're calling on your logical self to take over. And that in itself is just absolute gold. So I'm not going to go through this. You will get the slides, and I would encourage you to just sit down with a pen and paper and write through each of these points. Come back to us if you have any questions at all. Not each of these points are relevant to all of your businesses, and that's why I'm not going to go through them, because it would just, we are, as I said, we're precious enough on time. We have a lot of content, but the main thing is that you respond quickly. If you respond quickly, then you're in control. And more importantly, and it depends really on what your business is, if you respond quickly, you're seen to be in control. And in business, and I don't like saying this, but perception is everything. Now, so if we're going to do a business crisis management plan, that's all very well and good, but what about the personal?
Exactly, Gillian. Thank you for that, Gillian. That's a very passionate speech there from Gillian. Absolutely. In this business.
Don't make me spit my coffee,
Well, you're passionate. That's why I like working. We're very passionate about this. We really are. But also, we're very passionate about, you have to look after yourself and all this. Personal crisis management is vital in all this. As Gillian says, people come to us, they don't realize they have this until they're really confronted in a crisis, how resilient they are. They don't believe it. But these are actually the little techniques that we, again, there's a lot of stuff there that, again, the slides will be shown given to you all after this presentation. But the key is, and I give it this to everybody I work with, is creativity. Find your creativity in this crisis for your own personal development. Find it, whatever it is. You may be not aware of it. Painting, writing, jewelry, making something, it's powerful. Exercise, I'm a runner, I rave about it. Go out there, get out there, get the fresh air. We have 5K, embrace it. Embrace it. You may be, like Michelle, very fortunate to be beside Phoenix Park. Go for it, This is your time, your 6 weeks now. Use it to find who you are. Use it to find your creativity. Use it to find compassion for yourself. Use it for self-awareness. Use the CP3 cycle that we talked about. Use it as a tool to challenge your thoughts. Do that course you always wanted to do. Use this time because you are the person who can get you out of this. Once you get yourself out of this, then you'll be really, really confident who you are, and you'll be able to help your business go further. Gillian and I, at the start of this in March, our business was decimated, but we saw an opportunity. Being therapists, we really looked after ourselves, self-care, but then we saw opportunities in our business, and now it is really booming. We have many opportunities. So personal care first, business second, right?
You've heard of the whole idea. I assume most of you, if not all of you, have been on a plane, that tend to your own mask first. That's what self-care is. And self-care is not, I don't like saying this, but self-care is not the bubble baths and the chocolate cake. That's self-indulgence, and there is a difference. And I hate saying this because I love bubble baths and chocolate cake, and I indulge. I give myself those guilty pleasures. Self-care is tough love. It's being disciplined when you'd rather not be. And that's what self-care really is. And I was just checking up there. I don't have it to hand. It's downstairs because I've been using it. I made a self-care box. I got a shoe box. I covered it in wrapping paper and I filled it with things I loved. And I did this during I did this before, but I revamped it during first lockdown. I put candles, Yankee candles, bath bombs, chocolate, because, a teddy bear that my niece had bought me. So it became my self-care box. So on the really bad mental health days, it's like your business crisis management plan. You've got a box, or again, you can write out this plan, like all of the tips Dermot gave. And I know people who run the way Dermot does, and it's life-saving, literally life-saving. So for me, knowing that I love myself enough to have put a plan in place for on the days where I just don't really care that much helps me, because it helps me feel, oh yeah, I'm actually not that bad. I can manage, I can cope. And again, it gives you back that control when you feel out of control. And it reminds you, hey, I care about myself. The phrase makes me cringe, but you got this.
Totally, Gillian. It's self-care routine. Put a routine in place, because in myself, I have a routine: Monday run, Wednesday run. Well, swimming is gone now, but then I adapted. I was swimming, I adapted. I'll run again, I'll walk. So it's all about a self-care routine.
But I really believe all conflict falls under one of these 5 headings. And if you think back to the conflict you've experienced, if you don't know what your values are, I would encourage you to do some work on that. We're not here to do that talk, but again, we can send information if anybody needs kind of extra tips on doing this self-work. We're fans of it. But look at where the difference is. Where's the conflict? Remember, it's an opposition of forces. So where's the conflict coming from? Because if you can identify which type of conflict you're in, that is nearly the absolute key to conflict resolution. That is nearly enough. Doing that work, just identifying what kind of conflict is this. So conflict management, I do this a lot when I'm training executive coaches or doing SLT training or training on boards, and it's the idea of ego states. We generally have 3 overall ego state, which is parent, adult, child, and this has nothing to do with whether you are a parent or not. It's to do with our psychological state, how you communicate with someone. If you're having a disagreement or an argument with somebody, are you taking on the role of the scolding parent? Are you taking on the role of the bold and the chastised child? Or are you talking adult to adult, where I respect your opinions and listen even if I disagree, and you also respect me and listen even if you disagree? And that's when it's adult to adult. And very rarely in conflict is everybody in the adult ego state. Somebody will always take on the scolding parent and the bold child. And in that role, it's not 2 equals having a discussion. You cannot resolve conflict when you're in a parent-child dynamic, because you're bringing all of your emotional and psychological baggage from your own family drama into that conversation. And if the person reminds you of somebody you don't like, forget about it then. You cannot be in that adult headspace. So I would really say any conflict that you are in, to kind of come out of it and ask yourself, how old do I feel right now, and how old is the person I'm having this disagreement with? See what you can do to bring it back into adult to adult. And I've coached, I've done some management coaching where there's been conflict resolution, and when you get into the nitty gritty and start talking down and whittling it down, more often than not, somebody's taken on the parent role and somebody feels very patronized and defended. And I love this image. It shows in conflict we have this big outer like aggressor and like triggering persona, and really what's it protecting? When you're that defended, you're protecting something. Maybe it's vulnerability, maybe it's fear of being wrong. There's so much to this. We can only fit so much in a 40-minute talk, but you will get the slides, and even just that little image, it says a lot about and if you see a lot of animals, I'm thinking of a cat, the way they turn sideways and arch their back, they try to make themselves bigger than they actually are. Humans do the same in conflict. Our posture changes, our voice booms, our voice deepens. We actually release pheromones that give off this threatening. We turn into pretty much our animal primitive selves. But again, that's primitive brain in the driver's seat. When you're in that place, you're not adult. You're pretty much primate, never mind parent, but you're in that parent state. But what you're protecting is the vulnerability of being wrong, liking you, of somebody disagreeing with you. And there's a lot of work psychologically that goes into conflict management. And the first thing I would say is look at yourself first. Because if you're right, by default, everyone else is wrong. Maybe there can be room for every opinion. So we'll move on a little bit to conflict at work.
Yeah, this is what I'm seeing a lot in a role that I'm currently doing. That there is, again, as Gillian was saying about the parent role, there's a lot of conflict happening at the moment because people are stressed. People really don't know where they're going. They're looking for advice from their managers, and managers don't know what's going on because are they going to work at home or are they going to work in the office? So there's a lot of conflict at the moment, but it's about communication. Communication is key. Communication of how you feel, communication how you feel about the situation you're in. It's about communication. I'm working with a corporate as well, and they have a wellness program which encourage people to attend, to have their 30 minutes with me to talk about how they're feeling, and then they put a plan in place to talk to their manager about how they're feeling, because some of them are afraid. They're afraid to talk how they're feeling. They're afraid they're going to lose their job. So it's down about communicating with yourself to see what your needs And being a parent of yourself, and going and talking, for example, to me, and putting a plan in place and talking to that boss. But if you're a sole trader, or if you're in a small company as well, this is where you need to be internal and you're with yourself as well to find out what is causing your conflict within you. Is it you? Is it your boss? Is the person you work with? What's going on for you? And perhaps this is where personal therapy, if it's really, really benefit for people, to find out who they are, what's their lacking, what's their needs, what's causing conflict in work, and to give them the ability to increase their communication, because they now know what their values are, what their needs, and they're able to communicate it effectively, and just the conflict in work is reduced.
Yeah, excellent point. And I agree 100%. And you hit the nail on the head, Dermot. I think connection with self and honest communication with yourself. If you're lying to yourself, you're lying to everybody. You need to sit down. And Dermot, you said it earlier, journaling. Sit down and work it out. Work out what's going on for you, and then start thinking about the other. Because if you don't own who you are and take responsibility, you're just going to constantly be pointing the fingers, being that scolding parent. So for better connection, this is a quick cheat sheet. Trust me, we could do a week-long training on connecting and communicating better. First and foremost, shut up. Sorry, but shut up. In order to communicate, you need to listen. We can't listen if we're talking. Ask rather than tell, the idea of open-ended questions. We often, in stressful times, dictate, and I've been guilty of it. Whereas the tone when you ask rather than tell can make such a difference. And a lot of the managers I work with are afraid that they are seen as not authoritative by asking or adding the words please, which isn't the case at all, because people are more inclined. You remember your favorite teacher in school? Who did you do the most work for? And it's the same sort of psychological impact then in the workplace. It's very hard to communicate in person, but if you are having a difficult conversation, please, 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 please do your best to avoid text and email, please. The visual image of body language, we communicate more through our facial expressions. We are programmed when we meet another person in the street, our eyes to see if we feel safe or not safe, immediately scan the face. Before we look at any other body part, we're looking at the face. And then we make a decision in our brains, and it's an unconscious decision, is this person safe or not safe? So if you are having an angry discussion, try and have it as near to real life face-to-face. And if that means Zoom or Skype or Teams, so be it. Have the visual representation of letting your body language do the talking for you. It'll be a lot easier to get your message across. Soften responses. When I'm stressed, I get very efficient. That's one way to put it. Would you agree, Dermot?
Absolutely. Direct is another one, which I love now. I love directness, which we work well together.
Softly. I do try. It's a conscious thing. I do try to do it softly, and I will often ask for feedback.
You too.
I didn't mean to bark there. How was that received? And instead of that weakening my position as a manager, it means people then know when I am being efficient, people know, oh, Gillian's stressed, that's fine. And afterwards we'll be able to break it down and talk about it. So it's about softening the responses and also being honest about, this is me, I'm in work mode. I'll do the softly later on. I'll catch up with you and ask you about your weekend later on. But it's about knowing yourself and knowing your style and being able to kind of communicate that. Own your actions. Look, everybody makes mistakes. We're all human. Remember, primitive brain's going to kick in and tell you disaster, dying, danger, respond before logic. Because our brains, in terms of how they respond, logic is always the last part to kick in. You know, so we respond from a primate position first. Danger, response, crisis, drama. That's how we're wired. It's what has us alive today. It's what has us evolve into these incredible people that we are today. But if you don't take responsibility and own it and say, I don't like the word overreacted, but I responded from this place now that I've thought about it. And the rest there as well. And I have mediation, because sometimes if you are stuck and you cannot get out of that parent-child dynamic in your ego state, you really would benefit from having a mediator, and the sooner the better. Sometimes we're just so caught in our defenses. Effective communication can't happen without somebody else saying, have you tried this? Have you thought about this? Stop, pause, go. Like even another parent stepping in where you both become bold children to equal the dynamic and bring you up into everyone in the room is now an adult. Let's have an adult discussion.
Mindset. I'm conscious of time, but it's all about mindsets. I'll leave these, I just discovered this, the 3 A's. Awareness, accept, action. Awareness, accept, action. It's all about shifting the mindset. We've given you some tools here during this presentation. Use them, use them. You can wallow, to be direct, in your self-pity, but that will get you nowhere. You need to change the mindset. You have that ability to do it. So the 3 A's, awareness, acceptance, and action.
And the last slide we just want to talk about a photo finish. And if you have any questions, you can take off your mic once we get through this slide or pop them in the chat and we'll respond. And I'm aware this is a 40 minutes, so if you need to go, by all means do. You'll have the recording afterwards. In Menti, there's a last and final question. These are completely anonymous. We don't know who's answering what, so feel free to answer if you're happy enough to do so. And it's the idea of, where do you feel safe? Until I went to a therapist, gosh, for the first time, that was about 13 years ago, I had never, ever considered personal safety, ever. And my therapist at that stage asked me, where did I feel safe? And I went to therapy because of workplace conflict, ironically. It was 13 years ago, I've learned a lot. Where do you feel safe? It's a massive one. If you can know where you feel safe, you automatically have a cave to go and retreat to. And that will do you the world of good. You can recharge your batteries, replenish, reflect, do your journaling in that safe space. The importance, I really cannot stress enough the importance of psychological safety. There are so many health and safety departments in every organization. There are so many people who are focused on even your ergonomic assessment at your desk. They don't consider psychological safety, and that's actually more important, because your anxiety, your stress, your depression, all of those human emotions that we all feel at time to time and now and again come from feeling psychologically not safe. If you can feel psychologically safe, you're more productive, you're more happy, you're healthier. The benefits, I cannot even get into it. And like we would work with companies on establishing a culture of psychological safety, and usually we're talking a 6-month plan. So this is a one singular slide, but to get you thinking about where is safe? Where is safe? Where is safe in work? Where is safe at home? Where is safe in my head? There are different kind of areas and categories of psychological safety, but to even start thinking about, where do I feel safe? And if you have crisis and conflict, and 100% of you, by the way, said yes, conflict at work, 100%. It's what I would have guessed. You need a safe space. You need a place you can go to just switch off, to come down. And when you're in primitive brain, if you're relaxed, primitive brain is the brain that responds, that crisis management part. When you are safe, your anxiety, your stress reduces. So you're actually, when you're not fighting a perceived threat, and I do say perceived, then logic can come in. So go to your safe space and start working on calling in that logical person within you. Use the neocortex, use that part of your brain. So safety is just, I cannot stress the importance of safety enough. So that's pretty much, as I said, a lot of content, a lot to get through, but that's pretty much us. Enjoy changing the mindset from lockdown to restriction. You're not imprisoned, and make the most of the next 6 weeks, and hopefully we'll see you on the other side.
See you all, and see those opportunities out there, and bye for all. See you next time.